Here we go. All right. So I think it's recording. Cool. So yeah,
Well,
man, thank you for doing this with me. I appreciate you joining me, man. This
sure.
is a discussion that's near and dear to my heart, man. So
hmm
I wanted to get someone. It'd be easy to find people that agree with me because I have a YouTube audience and stuff that kind of is on the same page. That's why I wanted someone that takes the other perspective as me. So
Right.
I want to hear your perspective. So yeah, man, do you want to go first? And I just want to.
Um,
I'm sorry. Before you go, I just want to say the point of this is to educate people. I'm not trying to argue, so I'm not trying to win. I just want to make that clear. I just want to learn. Maybe we can learn from each other, and then the people watching this video, hopefully, they can learn too. That's my main goal.
okay.
That said, go ahead, man.
Yeah. So let's first define what we're arguing about exactly. Uh, I think what you had said was, if I remember correctly, it's something about the key signature defining all the modes or allowing all the modes to live in this one key signature versus the guys from like classical tonal system where they want everything to be viewed as either major or minor. Is that right?
Yep, pretty much.
Is that basically it? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a fairly large view of the whole thing, but I understand the argument that's being made by those guys. So
Yep.
that's why I'm totally cool with arguing that side,
Okay.
100%. So yeah, I mean, if you want me to go first, why don't you go first? So that way, because you introduced the whole thing anyway. So
Okay.
I really want to get first your idea pretty clear before
Okay.
I present my case or whatever.
Gotcha. Yeah. So my perspective is that there's more than just one perspective. You know, when I post in that group, people tend to think that I'm one sided, and I'm like, this is the way, and this is the only way. I'm not like that. My whole thing is that there's more than one perspective. Everyone knows the traditional major minor classical stuff. Major keys, minor keys.
Not everybody, but yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Musicians, they've all heard of major keys and minor keys before. Most musicians have heard of a major key and a minor key. Therefore, most musicians assume that there's only one way of doing this stuff, and there's major keys and minor keys. And then those of us that kind of like analyze this stuff probably too much, we probably analyze way too much unnecessarily nerdy stuff. But we come to figure it out. It's like, wait a minute, there's like more than one possible way that we can go about doing this stuff. So, in addition to that major key and minor key type of way of viewing thing, I have found that there's another way of viewing things where you just say, "Hey, key signature," they mean the same thing. And when you do that, if you take the first chord of the seven, each key signature is seven chords. If you take the first chord and say, "Hey, that's our home," now you got yourself the Ionian perspective, which most people would just say, "Hey, that's a major key." And then if you rearrange those chords in another way, you still have the same seven chords. You just kind of rearrange them in another way, such that the sixth chord now becomes your tonal center. That's the Aeolian perspective of the key signature, which most people would just refer to as a minor key.
All right.
Now, I know that there's more nuances than that. There's leading tones, and there's this, taking the fifth chord, making it major. There's all kinds of things, melodic minor, harmonic minor. But if we can just put all that stuff aside for now, and you can just say, hey, you have seven chords. If you arrange them in a certain way, it produces this sound, this Ionian type of sound. If you rearrange them in another type of way, it produces this other sound, this sadder sound, the Aeolian sound. But then you can also rearrange them in five other ways. So there's five other possible rearrangements. And then also within this model, it doesn't mean that you have to just use those seven chords. You're not limited to just those seven chords. So if you take, like, say, take those seven chords, arrange them in such a way that chord number 2 is your tonal center. Chord number 2 is your tonal center. We're now going to call that the 1 chord. You're going to number the rest of the chords accordingly. That's the Dorian perspective under this model. So when you're playing in the Dorian perspective, it has like a different type of sound. The intervals of the underlying scale are now that of the Dorian scale formula.
Right. To be clear, you mean different than what exactly? C major, like if we say D Dorian, what you mean is it has a different sound than it would if it was C major, and it's
Yeah,
a different sound than it would if it was D minor.
Yes.
It's something unique relative to those two things, right?
Yes. Yeah. And then within those, yeah, so it doesn't quite sound as one way to label it as happy as a traditional major key, like happy birthday. Or it doesn't quite sound as sad as Aeolian or a minor key, you know? It's like right in the middle there. It has like Santana plays in a lot of like Dorian type of progression. So I just kind of think of it in my head as Santana-esque sound, you know? So when you're within this Dorian type of perspective, you're not just limited to 7 chords. You know, you can use as many chords as you want. You can use outside chords, but they're just labeled as out of key. You know, so you have your in key chords, and then any other chords that get thrown into the mix are out of key. But the primary framework is the Dorian framework, you know, because you're taking these 7 chords and you're rearranging them in such a way that you're producing a Dorian sound. So that's my whole thing as far as that type of model goes. And of course, that's not the only model. That's just one perspective. So that's really that's the main summary of it. And of course, we can get more
Okay.
into it. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I mean, these are typical things we hear, especially with modern music. You know, so we're not talking about classical music anymore. We're talking about Santana and stuff,
Yeah.
right? So here's the thing. Um, a little bit of background for me. My father was a musician, classical guitarist, and music teacher. And I was getting into rock guitar like a lot of kids from the guitar magazine, which would have tablature, so you didn't have to really know how to read any notes.
Yeah.
And then they would analyze the song, and they would use theory to
Yeah.
analyze what's going on with Def Leppard or whatever it was, and say, oh, here he's playing the Aeolian mode. Here he's using a pentatonic scale with a blues note. Here is a harmonic minor because of the rate, whatever, right? And so you're a kid and you're reading this stuff and you're like, oh, this is amazing. This is crazy. What's going on, right? You just learn it from the tablature and you start to get an intuition on the instrument, like a guitar. So at some point I got into more advanced music and I was doing my scales and I was into the harmonic minors thing, okay? And I composed and I was trying to teach myself how to read music properly, not using tablature, right? I could read basic position stuff, but what I wanted to do was like write music that's more complicated, right? So to do that, I thought I'm going to get a pen and paper. I'm going to write out my own song that I'm writing, right? So I wrote this etude or whatever it is exercise using harmonic minor, like all over the neck, like E harmonic minor.
Okay.
And so what I wrote as my key signature was an F sharp because I was playing F sharp everywhere, and I wrote a D sharp because I was playing D sharp everywhere. There were no D naturals in this thing, right? So that was my key signature. That was my etude. I wrote notes all over. So at the time, as I'm learning, I was thinking that the key signature represents the notes you're going to play, right? It's just like a shorthand for like, oh, I don't want to have to keep writing these in. So I'm going to make my key signature represent the notes I'm playing, right?
Okay.
And then I showed this thing to my dad. I was like, look, I'm like Bach. I'm writing my own music. Check it out, you know. And he kind of laughed at the whole thing, and he said, oh, you know, you've got, you know, the wrong key signature. I was like, what? How could that be wrong? Those are the notes I'm playing. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. And yeah, it's like there's no D sharp and F sharp in the same key signature like you have it. It just doesn't exist. And I was like, what? What do you mean it doesn't exist? I just played it, dude. Like, come on. I'm a genius. You know, I'm rewriting music here, you know. And then I had like a bass line and there was like a parallel fifths or whatever. He goes, oh, and you have consecutive fifths here. And I'm like, what? That's basically Black Sabbath's first thing I learned. I mean, the consecutive fifths are what music is about, you know. So, you know, that was the beginning of my journey, more or less. And then I was very fortunate. I had a guitar teacher at a summer camp, literally in one day. And this is me already playing in different keys, knowing a little bit how to read, but not really understanding what the key signature was related to what I'm playing, right? And he put the circle up, circle of fifths, and he said, well, this is how music works. You got the majors, you got the minors inside. So there's only majors, there's only minors. They relate by that third interval that we can do on guitar if we can visualize it, you know. I feel bad for singers and horn players and stuff. They'll play chords if they don't have exposure to chords, sometimes this whole concept doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
They don't really care much about it.
Exactly.
Couple people do if they're more advanced, like horn players that want to do Coltrane, where there's no chords, it's just melody, and they're already going around the circle, right? Okay. Or cello players, they learn from the Bach suite that, oh, I'm doing harmonies, I'm changing keys. And
okay.
But, you know, what I saw in school when I went to music school is that, you know, a lot of people had trouble because they didn't play chords. And you're already talking about chords, so you already know this. So this is, you know, a lot of this is coming from guitar perspective or piano perspective, right? So he drew the circle, put the minors in and the majors outside. And I recognized right away that there was a sequence to the sharps and there's a sequence to the flats. And those are also related by fifths. And everybody's trying to say, oh, every good boy, or, you know, B, E, A, D, G, C, F. Like, they're doing mnemonics to memorize this thing. I was like, no, guys, those are fifths. It's all fifths. It's all power chords, basically. That's all I saw. And I was like, these are all power chords. And he says, if you're in a key, you got these 6 chords, and he blocked them off. And you want to know what key you're in or what scale you need to play or whatever relative to the key signatures, these 6 chords. And if you add this note, one note, you've shifted the wheel. And you do this note, and you've shifted over here. And you do this, and you do that. Now, all of a sudden, it all made sense. And I saw right away here's C, here's F, here's G. There's F, that's Lydian. There's Mixolydian. You know, there's the modes. They're encompassed in the key itself.
Yep.
So basically, a key is the modes. But what they're all centering on and what they're converging on, and this is what you finally figure out, is like, well, you need this dominant chord to define this. And as soon as you go over here, that's that dominant chord. You've shifted the wheel. So suddenly the connection becomes dominant tonic, dominant tonic, dominant tonic everywhere on the wheel. And it unlocked basically all of music theory for me in like one day. I was like, oh my God, I get it. I totally understand now why, like, I heard those Yngwie Malmsteen things, like F sharp minor, and then you don't put that extra E sharp in there. You have to take that from over here or down here or wherever it comes from. You're borrowing that one. It doesn't belong there. And you're doing that to justify this minor key thing. Now, if I hadn't been exposed to that kind of music, heavy metal stuff where they're actually using dominant function, I might not have noticed and been like a lot of other people that don't understand the minor key is a contrived thing. It doesn't exist on the wheel. It just doesn't exist. You have to contrive it. So I got all that, and then I went through college, and I aced all the music theory because of that understanding. It was a very complete and universal understanding of all music. So for me, even at that time, at that young age, for me, there was no such thing as Lydian. Not in that framework. There is only the 4 chord. And you're just, if you want, you'll pull it out and you isolate it. You can be Santana and play for 3 hours on that one chord. Or the Dorian one underneath it, which is directly related, or the Mixolydian one over here. And if you want, you can use those 2 and never play the one.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're just, but you're deluding yourself if you think that you're doing something other than that, which is, you know, 5 and 2, 5 and 2. You think that you're doing Mixolydian, or you think you're doing Dorian, but you're not. What you're really doing, because you're trapped inside that wheel, you can't escape it. Like after this collapse of modes happened in what we call the common practice area, and the first German dude drew that circle exactly as we still use it.
Yeah.
After that historical thing happened, for me, it's like a giant filter. And what came along for the ride was the tuning. Like they were advocating this probably back in ancient times, like in Mesopotamia. Like, guys, you're out of tune. You got to put this half steps equal. You know, I'm sure there were guys that were saying, you're crazy. It sounds like shit. And, you know, and so they were stuck for thousands of years in one key, and they would make a flute like that. And then they would have to make another flute because you can't change keys.
Oh, okay.
And these dudes were like, no, going back, I have evidence of 1550. The guy said, these lutes, I have a lute here, the strings are tied frets, and you move them around so that the sound's more in tune relative to the key you're playing in. And this dude was like, no, guys, you sound horrible. You all sound out of tune. You got to glue these frets down precisely as I'm telling you. And you look at what the math is, and it's what we do right now. Now they do auto tune. It's the same
Okay.
thing. They've been advocating for this, and people have been fighting against it for thousands of years. But once it started to come into framework, and you got 12 notes, you can't have 13. You know, they tried that. They had that. One of the guys on this Facebook page would put that keyboard with the 19 notes. You know, I'm like, oh my god, that's why. And they're
Doesn't
still
fit the
teaching.
equal temperament there, right?
They're
Yeah, yeah.
still teaching this in university because, like the string student, oh, if you're in an ensemble, you better play your D flat a little sharper than the C sharp.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because they're
Okay.
not the same note.
Yeah.
If you don't have a fret, you can do that. You know, and it actually sometimes works depending on what the other notes are. In some cases, you're what I call it is robbing. What was it robbing Peter to pay Paul or whatever that is? It's like
Gotcha.
you're going one direction or the other, and the string players still are teaching this and they're learning this, and then you hear them play and you go, God, these guys are out of tune, man. Put this ensemble through an auto tune and it sounds beautiful, right? So what is that? Well, guys that play piano and guitar, we don't care much about it. I mean, we can bend on the guitar and all that and adjust it. You know, but singers, you know, they sing out of tune all the time. I recorded in a studio early on in my career, and the engineer told me how, and he played me a recording the a cappella group, and they sound beautiful the whole way, but if you compare the beginning to the end, they're not in the same key.
Okay.
They drift because it's natural to do that, and it's
Okay.
not natural to have equal temperament. Once you have this equal temperament thing, well, you don't really have modes anymore. They're gone. They collapse. They're destroyed by it. So that what we have now is tonic and dominant functionality. And that's it. And anytime you want to use those other chords, the submediate, the median, the submediate, the whatever they call it, I can't even remember them all. Like, I don't even use that terminology because once I saw the wheel, I said, oh, I don't need all that extra stuff. What they're calling Lydian is the 4 chord. That's it, you know. Or if you're minor, it could be the 6 chord, you know. But you have to define minor, and you
Yeah.
can't do it because it's the 6 chord. You can't define it. It doesn't exist. You have to contrive it. And the way you do that is you raise the leading tone, you create dominant function, either the diminished seventh or the 5, and then the thing I learned in school, which it made perfect logic to me, and it does now, and I see people do it wrong all the time. I don't understand why they don't understand this. Roman numerals. They're representing something. They're carrying
Yes.
information.
100%.
Yeah, if you see a lowercase 2, you know you're in the major. If you see it with a diminished symbol, you know you're in the minor. If you see a lowercase 7, you could be diminished. But if you see a big 7, then you know that's the minor key is no
Okay.
longer, you know. And so what you're going to have to do, because that chord doesn't exist in the minor key,
Yeah.
7, big Roman numeral 7. It's like a G in A minor. Doesn't exist. That chord, if it occurs in a piece of music anywhere, like in A minor, you want to call it that, it's not the 7 chord. It is the 5 of the 3. It's the dominant chord to the 3. There is no other thing. You can pretend that it's a 7, but you're deluding yourself and believing in you're pretending it is. It's not real. The reality is what's on that circle. So
Okay.
the only functional 7 has to be the little one with the diminished symbol on it. And
Okay.
that and then all of a sudden, you know, you learn that trick. Like all guitar players, oh, it's the same chord. Bing, 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 bing. It's the same chord. Oh, and there's only 3 of them. Physically. Physically, there's only 3. But conceptually, no. No, there is one for every minor key because you have to create it. You have to contrive it. Every single one of those chords is contrived. They don't exist on the wheel. There is no diminished seventh on the wheel. It doesn't exist. You have
Okay.
to contrive it by raising the seventh. And what that is the root of the chord. And there's only one root. And every time they spell the other notes however they want, they say, you can be anything you want. It can resolve here and there and everywhere. And I'm like, no, it can't. You have to spell it correctly. And every one of those other chords you think is the same one is an inversion. It's not that chord. But you got to spell it right. And you don't understand spelling if you don't understand the circle. If you think the circle is just a memorization tool for the order of sharps, or or where G is relative to C.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the circle. I love it. I got it tattooed on my arm right here.
There
So
you go.
I love the circle.
Yeah,
I have been obsessing over this. So I might you
yeah,
seem to know a lot about this. You know some stuff that I haven't heard of before, and that's really interesting. That's why I like
right,
this.
right.
Um,
So in modern music, because there is still coexisting, like what I call it is like a big filter, is when we collapse the modes into major and minor.
okay,
I can tell you specifically how that happened, for what it used to be, the ecclesiastical modes. Those modes are not the modes we use today. That's not the Dorian mode that Miles Davis wants to play.
okay,
The Dorian mode was just, well, I don't even want to get into that. Let's just say that that's not what it was. It was something more ambiguous. It was more like a key because they used musica ficta and musica vera. Vera was the white keys of the piano plus B flat. That was the universal scale.
so an 8 note scale then.
Basically, yes. And
Okay,
at any moment, you create a B flat or a B, and the way they spelled it, they did use letters. They had this system where they use A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but they didn't, to make the distinction between B and B flat, they call B, B flat, and H is the other one. And they're basically representing the little b and the sharp or whatever, the natural, right? There's a B and H. So you have the natural one, which is the B, natural. And you could write a B flat in the key signature, but you didn't have to. And sometimes they didn't even put it in the music. Like you're supposed to notice seeing a B flat because of the other voices, because you're trying not to make a tritone or whatever the rules of your church are in wherever you're singing this.
okay,
And you read the music, and in the moment, you interpret it that way, and you use sharp and flat and things like that. And the system they used for learning how to sing, sight sing, was called solemnization. We still have this do, re, mi, fa, right? They used ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la. They didn't use C or T because every time that note appeared, you're confused which one you want. You want B flat or you want B natural. And so what they would sing instead for that is mi, fa. So a fa is always B flat and mi is always the sharp. So whenever you see a sharp, you say mi, fa, and you sing it like mi, fa, or whatever, mi, fa, mi, fa, mi, fa. It's a half step. So this whole mess is very ambiguous from our modern perspective. That's not Dorian. Like, you could have a B, you could have a B flat. Doesn't matter. It has a C sharp here in the cadence. You have this, that, and the other. There's rules for how the voices work. And in the end, and then they put a big Picardy third right in the middle, not at the end, in the middle of the thing. There's a big F sharp right there to make the chord sound major.
okay,
Because again, they're singing and they're in a big cathedral, and you got two guys singing D, D. There's an F sharp ringing out in the note itself, the overtone. And when
okay.
the other guy's singing D, F, it just clashes and goes wah, 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 so they go and it comes into alignment. So that's why they had to keep singing those sharps or whatever. Once you see that that's what's going on, and you know who would do accidentals or whatever because they had tablature. Here, I'll show it to you. This stuff is from 1538, man. It looks just like guitar tab, basically.
Oh wow, yeah,
It's
yeah,
basically guitar tab is what it is. This is a lute, or vihuela, they call it in Spain, but it's a lute. And it was 6 strings, just like guitar, except it's like a 12 string. Because the strings are too flubby. They're like, you couldn't hear it, so they would double it in the octaves so that you could actually hear the note.
gotcha.
And so they would just write one line, put tabs, frets, wherever you play the frets. And what they were doing with this music wasn't chords. In fact, these gatekeepers of Renaissance thinking are like, those aren't chords, those are voices. It's all vertical. I mean, it's all horizontal, it's not vertical. They don't start thinking vertically until this whole collapse of all this mess of a system. Because there's so much ambiguity in what they call Dorian or Phrygian or Lydian or Mixolydian. Those were the only modes they had. They didn't have Ionian. They didn't do that. Because it's all based on the priests mumbling their chants like D, F, G, and that's it. And every final note was one of those 4 notes. And so all the modes were those. And the minorish sounding ones, minorish meaning they had an F, like a re, mi, fa, right? If they had that rather than ut, or the let's see, re, mi, fa, I don't want to sing it. It's C, C, D, E, right? That kind of major sound was Lydian. So it's either based on F.
Okay.
And then the F Lydian would either have, again, the B flat or a B natural. And it's vague. Is it really Lydian? No, it's not. It's something in between. And all that mess is vague, and it collapses into the tonal system we have now, which is major and minor. And that's it. So when they say, well, I'm going to play in Lydian, I'm going to play in Dorian, they don't mean what it used to mean. They mean we're going to do a fake mode. We're going to do a pure Dorian, which is indistinguishable from chord 2 in the major as Dorian or chord 4 in the major. And that's what we're doing. And if you want to call it Dorian or whatever, just so that you know that's what we're doing, what that word is really encompassing is, no, we're playing the 4 chord and we're not playing any other chords. We're basically going to stick to this and make it into a big giant circle, and that's what it is. So that comes to the argument. All right, well, how can we then, in a piece of music, and we're going to write it out and talk about it and analyze it or whatever, talk about a chord that's just sitting there, it's not doing anything. It's not functioning. It's just a 2 chord or a 4 chord. It's just sitting there. It's Lydian or Dorian, whatever it is. And it never resolves. Like the resolution that happened, the collapse of the mode that started to occur is you take a pure Mixolydian and you collapse it into the pure Ionian. And that's dominant and tonic function. So you're mixing those 2 modes together is what's really happening. And therefore you don't really have modes anymore. You have this bigger thing, which is the key that ate it all up. It's gone. There's no more modes. Now you have function and relationship, and that's it. So now what do we do when we want this Mixolydian and we only want this? And we want to define it by the terms that we've been defining music now for hundreds of years, which is major or minor, tonic, 1, number 1, Roman numeral 1. What is it now? And that's what you said. You said, there's a 2 chord, but we're calling it 1. And I'm like, well, you can't do that. You're pretending that you're doing that. You're not really doing that, right? So how can you really do that? How can you call it to a 1? Well, you have to turn the wheel and put your 1 right at 12 o'clock, whatever that is. And so once you do that and you turn the wheel, along for the ride comes all the key signature and everything, the whole mess of relationships. I'm on 1 now. It was a 5, but I'm making it the 1. So that means I have to have a sharp. It has to be there. It's the conception of the whole picture. And once you have that sharp and you have the thing, now what you have to do to make it your Mixolydian is you have to put a natural sign every single damn time so that you can say, I'm in G, it's number 1, like I'm defining with the key and the key signature. And I've turned the wheel and we are here. This is number 1. But I don't want to hear that F sharp anymore. I just want naturals. So now I got to write it out every damn time for you. And that's where their argument is coming from.
All right. Yeah, I got it. That's a lot of good stuff there, man. A lot of good history that I wasn't aware of. I like that. Right at the very end. That I think that's the part where the 2 different models kind of that's where the disagreement kind of all comes down to. There's a couple other things you said I wanted to touch on, but we'll just touch on this last thing.
Okay.
You said if you wanted to make, so starting in the original key of C and you wanted to make the G chord, the Mixolydian, you want to make that your new 1. You said you have to take the whole circle, and so that would be the perspective.
Yeah.
We have.
Yeah, otherwise it's 5. It's number 5, and you're just doing number 5.
I got a notification. It says I have 10 more minutes left. So I have another link. If you want to keep talking, I'm just going to send you another Zoom link to your to the DMs. That's going to be in 10 minutes from now, though. It's because I'm 40-minute time limit on Zoom. I'm on the free thing or whatever. But anyway, yeah. So if we're in the key of C and you want to make G to be your new 1, and we're attempting to play Mixolydian. You know, you're saying that you have to turn the whole circle and everything else.
Yeah, that's what clicks into place as 1. Number 1 is the 12 o'clock position.
So that's the perspective that you are arguing against. I'm not trying to argue, but I'm saying
arguing in favor of. I'm in favor of. Like that's how it should be done if that's what you want it to be. You don't want it to be a 5 chord that never resolves. You want it to be number 1 and only number 1. The bass player, everybody has in their head, G. We are in G. We're not in C, and this is the 5 chord. We are in G.
Yep.
And we now need that extra note that we want to have that color, which is the F sharp has to go, and you have to write it every time. Natural, 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 natural.
So that's the way that you're arguing in favor for. Yeah. So you have to turn the whole wheel in order to do that.
Yeah.
So the way that I would be arguing in favor of would say that you have your whole wheel, right? Your whole wheel, but then you have your key of C, which forms this you could call it like a mini circle.
Right.
You know, it's a grouping of 6.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you have a circle that shows the diminished chord on there too, then it'll be a grouping of 7.
Right.
So the perspective I'm arguing against would say that you keep this wheel, you keep the thing intact, and just look at the mini circle of 7, and just rotate that. So now instead of C being top dead center, you rotate it, and now G is top dead center. You still have all your same 7 chords.
But that's not any different, though. That's the same
It
thing.
becomes 1, but then if you look at it from the intervals, then you have your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, and then you number your chords accordingly. Your 1 chord is now your G. Your 2 chord would then be your A minor chord. Your 3 chord is your B minor chord. And you number these chords according to the scale formula: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. So your 7th chord is not a 7 chord; it's a flat 7 chord. So that's the way that's the way that I would see.
Right. I get it. I get that argument, and what's wrong about it is that you're pretending the 5 chord is a 1 chord, and it's not. It's the 5 chord so long as you use that key signature. That's the point.
Okay.
You think you're doing that. I mean, you're literally doing it. And the reason it's wrong is because you have the wrong tonic. You're really just saying, I'm playing the 5 chord. You know, why renumber them? The numbers are already there. Just say, oh no, I want 5 and 4, 5 and 4, 5 and 4. That's it. I don't want 1. And we never have 1. We're just doing 5 and 4, 5 and 4. And that's why they say, this is not functional. It's not function. These chords are non-functional. They're just, what they mean is like this, you're just doing 4 and 5, or 2 and 5, 2 and 5, 2 and 5. Like, you're just not resolving anything. And that's what it is. And by calling one of them 1, you're deluding yourself that you've turned a wheel, but you didn't. In order to do that and call it 1, you have to turn the whole wheel with the correct key signature and then write against the key signature. It kind of goes back to what I said in the beginning about my harmonic minor. By writing the wrong key signature, I was doing that same erroneous mental exercise that, oh, that's the note I want to play, so that's my key signature. That's not correct.
You were writing your key signature based off a harmonic minor scale. If you write your key signature based off of a Mixolydian scale, you're not really technically breaking the rules of writing key signatures, because if you wanted to write the key signature of G Mixolydian, you wouldn't have any sharps or flats, Right.
So what I'm saying,
okay,
right.
Go ahead.
That's right, except that what I'm saying is doing that this is the key signature of G Mixolydian is not a correct statement anymore. Not since the collapse of Mixolydian into the framework of the dominant of the Ionian. It doesn't exist as its own key signature. Everything is a child of the Ionian, basically.
Yeah, they call it the parent major scale.
That's what it is. And so by renumbering it, you're just deluding yourself into thinking that you're doing something that you're not doing. Is what I'm saying.
I'm always maintaining that that's the same key. When I talk about playing in G Mixolydian, that's why I'm always like this whole thinking in terms of 12 keys as opposed to like 84 keys, because 84 keys would be ridiculously complicated, So I'm like, yeah, if you're in G Mixolydian, you're in the same key as C major or C Ionian, which is the same key as A Aeolian or A minor or whatever. G Mixolydian is just one of the 7 possible perspectives of that key.
Right. So the term there, key, the key of G Mixolydian, that doesn't exist. That's my point. That's what their point is going to be as well. That is the dominant of C major. You're in the dominant harmony in the moment, but you're not in the key of G Mixolydian. There is no such thing. There's only the key of G major or the G minor. That's it. And so the terminology and the thinking, of what is number 1. And you say, now I've defined number 1 as G. No, as soon as you do that, you've turned the wheel, even though you didn't want to. Okay, that's what they're saying. It's like think of it like a gravity well that you fall into, and you can't get out. This has happened historically. All those modes collapse down. They used to be able to do that, and there was ambiguous sound. And so anyway, that's their argument. Now, once the historical collapse has occurred, you don't have the luxury of redefining everything. It's already happened. It's corrupted all those modes. You're pretending that you're in a mode by isolating it and extracting it from its family and then playing around with it. But you're pretending it's a real mode or it's a pure mode, but it's not. It's already corrupted and tainted by the gravity of the major and the minor that's existing in nature or in the circle and the tuning that you have to see.
I guess that's the part that I still would have to pick your brain more about. You said the natural, in nature, the major and minor are the only things that truly exist.
Since the collapse. Yeah. I mean, because coexisting with those are proper Eastern modal systems where you can't change keys anyway. So you can only do the pure mode.
Okay.
And that's why, and people like that. Like they get into that whole philosophy and everything, and the raga, and it's like, what do they have? They have a drone, and it doesn't change, and you have to have that, or else your mode doesn't tune right and everything. And the notes that you choose to play are very specific ones that fit that, and you can't do this mess of modulating through the keys and all that. So we're using fake modes now in the Western music, like on a piano or a guitar, it's a fake mode, totally fake, because it's just imaginary. And what you're really doing, and you can say whatever you want it to be, you can call it peanut butter, it doesn't matter what you call it. It is what it is in the theoretical abstract world, which is it's either whatever that chord is on that wheel. It's like the dominant chord, or it's the 4 chord, or it's this or that. That's what's going on.
All right, let me see how much time I have. I'm gonna have to send you this other link. So I have 2 minutes left. I'm just gonna send you this other link now. We might as well just jump on the other one before this thing shuts off on us.
All right, that's cool.
Yeah, because I have a few more questions. This is a great conversation, man. I really love this stuff.
And what I'm gonna do at the end is, though, I'm gonna teach you why you're right and I'm not.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm arguing strongly for something that I know is not true, but I'm gonna explain what you need as the ammunition to.
All right. Cool. I'm looking forward to it. I'll send you over that link. But yeah, man. So this is great stuff. So I guess this would then lead me to the next thing, because we were talking about how there's only one parent major, and then all of the modes are just an arrangement, which brings up the question, like, what's up with these minor keys then? Because you take this chord, you're like, hey, this is our 1 chord now. We're just rearranging the wheel. This is our 1 chord. Now it's a minor key.
Right.
But it seems like it's just a major key that's been rearranged, like it seems like A minor is just a rearranged version of C major. And then they just did a couple alterations to it. They gave it a leading tone and stuff like that, which is something that you could also do if you take the chords and rearrange them for a Dorian perspective. You can give that a leading tone, give that a 5 chord, a major 5 chord and stuff like that too, you know?
So the Dorian perspective, as you say, this is exactly what happened historically. The ambiguity of that and a minor, it collapses into the minor, okay? So what you're seeing as Dorian in the melodic minor scale, for example, it's like it is Dorian with the raised 7th, right? So what is that? Well, that's what minor key means. Like there's no more modes. The modes they got eaten up. They're collapsed. They've been devoured. And they symbiotically live inside of the minor key now. The minor key is the thing that you're actually doing. That's why the one guy had a thing about like, well, what's wrong playing a C sharp in the Dorian? And then they made the brilliant statement, because I know they're arguing with some guy who's looking at it from this major minor perspective. Like, you want a pure Dorian, you have to fake it into it by extracting the 2 chord and just doing that and being very pure about that 2 chord. Like, do not introduce any accidentals in there. Oh, I can play what I want. I'll do the blues bend. Yeah, of course, but that's beside the point of the exercise mentally, that you're isolating and you want a purification of the 2 chord out of its context, right? Okay. And like I said, if that's a 2 chord until you label it as 1. And then what is that? Well, you have to turn the wheel, and now there's a flat there. And you don't want that flat, so now you have to write against that flat, and it's exactly what happens in the minor key. It's a contrivance, because you now have to put that C sharp in, which is not in the key signature. You have to get rid of the B flat. That's a B natural. That's your melodic minor. And if you want to call it Dorian, fine, but we've already been through this. Like the Dorian's dead. It collapsed. It's fake Dorian. You're pretending you're in Dorian. What you're really doing is D minor, and you're doing all the typical contrived alterations that are required to make the key function on its own. When they collapsed, yeah, when they collapsed all the modes into the minor key, along for the ride came the stuff they used to do in the Renaissance and stuff with polyphonic voice leading, which is that they need the raised leading tone for the cadence. They needed, it was ambiguous. You have B or B flat.
Mm-hmm.
That was Dorian. So that's what it's saying. It's not really Dorian's minor key. It's got all the chromatics. The whole chromatic wheel is available now, and we define the key now by the function of the harmony and what the voices do, and that's the minor key now. It's eaten up the mode Dorian, and it's eaten up the A Phrygian at the same time, which was the dominant function. And those modes are the minor ones that collapse. Dorian and Phrygian, they collapse into the minor key. That's it. And the same with the Lydian and the Mixolydian. Those were the church modes. Those collapse into the 4-chord and the 5-chord, and they all bleed to 1, which they called ut back then. And C, they used the letter names too, but they used the solmization instead because they didn't have absolute pitch back then. You go to one church and the organ's a completely different damn key, and so you have to modulate everything, right, for the voices. Because that's what doesn't change. People's voices are in one range, and you don't get to change that. It's a physical reality. They have a call what's the break zone, where you go and your voice break. Every guy has the same range. Every girl has the same range. Their voice cracks right there, and it's called the passaggio. And you learn techniques for singing through it. And once you learn some of that singing thing, and you realize that's a reality, that's not something that's different for each person. It's the same for everybody. You realize you can actually know the note based on your break, like where you have to break or change your technique. That's an F. It has to be where it is, And so even though they had that, they were building instruments that weren't like what we call today A440. So they were lower, anyone that they've found historically, it's hard to say what it was. And the strings were made of animal guts that were like whatever, you'd never, they would build bigger or to get bassier notes, and like smaller guitars would be higher pitch. But they didn't have a standard. So what they use is the notation system was just no sharps and flats usually, unless it's in one of those modes that's the minor mode, you have to use flats. And they never used sharps back then. There was no sharp key. And so if you look at the score, you don't know what pitch that is. It can be any pitch, but it's conceptual that's the key you're in, right? And they have the C clef, and that's the one that would move around. It's hard to read until you get used to it. And it's just showing you where ut is C, or what we think do, re, mi. And it just moves around like this. And you have to figure out what key you're in based on the mode, the melody, the main melody, not the counter melodies. Those ones don't tell you anything. It's the main melody, whatever it is, and it's almost always descending. And that's where the cadences come from. Okay. That's and the voice above it has to go the other direction, and that's where you get a harmony, like a 5-chord. And every single cadence in every single mode would have something very similar to what we have today, either a diminished chord or a 5-chord that resolves to the tonic. And they realize it's so ambiguous. It's not really Dorian. It's not. What was that defining? It was kind of defining a relative pitch thing. If it wasn't Dorian and it's Mixolydian, it's G is your final note, or D, whatever D is on your instrument. And so that whole mess collapses. And then they realize, and at the same, like I said, at the same time, they want equal half steps. So now they have all the keys you can play in, and you can modulate using the dominant function. You introduce what used to be called musica ficta, or fake notes, against the key signature, which was the real notes, musica vera. When those little sharps pop in, or flats, or whatever, you start moving around the wheel. And the first time they started doing this, man, was like 1540s. The guys started adding flats. And then there was implied flats that you don't see because of the voicing. And then you start going around. He went all the way around from F major, all the way around the flat side, right, to basically E major.
Oh, wow.
And at that point, he had F flats. hearing, and then the other voices were doing that, enharmonic to get over there.
Okay.
And then he stopped basically. So he went well, like 2/3 the way around, and without knowing there is a circle because they didn't have it yet, right? Because they hadn't. This was for voices only, not for instruments. But as an intellectual game, they were already trying to play this game. Once they get it together, that's it. It's like, historically speaking, what we do today, like Miles Davis, like John Coltrane is cramming all these chords in. All that is extremely tonal and harmonic. Everything he was doing was like he's introducing a new note in the scale, and that changes the harmony. And he was very. If you analyze the solos very slow and he's playing so fast, he's hitting all those notes. He's not playing whatever he wants, chromatic nonsense. They're very precise. It was the very extreme end of the bebop stuff. And then Miles Davis says, "Fuck that. We're just gonna play D, but it's not gonna be D minor. It's Dorian." And so now you got pure modes, and everybody thought that was so cool. It's like, even that's where the word came from, cool. And so that's fake modes. They're fake. They're not real modes. It's a concept. He's all those songs like the Dorian, So What, that's like blues. They're blues form. And he's replacing the 2-5-1 chords with one chord, like the D one. And then the turnaround, he goes, okay, E flat now. Tritone sub for the dominant, basically. It's like the whole music is a tritone sub of the dominant. It just goes up a half step and then back. And like that concept of playing a pure mode, it's not a real one. It's like, but you can't call that the 2 chord. That's what it is. And he's not ever playing 1 or 5, the real 1 and 5 in that family. He wants us to pretend it's 1. And in doing so, if you want to be correct, you have to turn the wheel, and there it is, D minor, and there's a flat, and he doesn't want that flat. He wants you to play B natural all the time. And so that's what's going on.
All right. So, yeah. So based on everything you're telling me, it sounds like a lot of this has to do with what's happened in history too.
Yeah.
So assuming that we because I don't think a lot of people know the history of stuff. A lot of people are just going off the fact like, hey, we have 12 notes.
Well, most people learn like in school that have any of this complaint. Anybody that says I need the key signature of D minor to write Dorian, and then I put against the key signature B natural. Anybody that's saying that has a training in school that begins from this filter. It begins from the common era or common practice era of music. And then most of the time, if they were taught correctly, they learn what I found out later I learned was the Weber Roman numeral analysis. And once you start doing that, they might start you with a Bach chorale, which ironically is the overlap place. And they have you analyze it bottom up based on the bass line. You fill in the voices and you put the Roman numerals with the correct size and kind or whatever for whatever key. You establish which key. Is it major or is it minor? That's all it is, right? And you learn it from bottom up. And the truth is that nobody tells you, and this is what I was going to get into, why you're actually right and you don't know it, is that they teach everybody that in school. In other words, they teach you from the beginning of the filter onward. And then they teach you all about music theory that way from classical music and, until you get to augmented 6 chords. And then you start going, what are these? It's something screwed up here. And they don't tell you what all that is. But if when you figure what that is, and then you realize, oh, okay, I get what's going on now. But this is what happens there with Bach. They teach everybody starting place. That's music theory 101. You begin with this. Bach chorale, fill in the voices, Roman numeral analysis. Sometimes you're just given a bass line. And figured bass, fill in the voices. That's not how Bach wrote those. In fact, he didn't even write those songs, those chorales. He didn't compose them.
Okay.
He's arranging the church hymn melody, which was always in the top voice. So he's basically harmonizing it top down. Top down, not bottom up.
Not bottom up, okay.
Exactly the opposite of what they're teaching in the school. So why is that? It's because he's inherited those songs from 200 years before. Those are from the Renaissance. Those are voice polyphonic part writing. They're motets is what they are. And they call them chorales in Germany, that's all. But there were motets everywhere in every country. with different names, madrigal and this kind of thing. And it's a top-down harmonization, but they don't teach you that. They don't teach you that that melody isn't even in a major or minor key. Those are modes. But he's harmonizing them based on, what they're about to teach you, which is major and minor, right? Because the collapse occurred, and he's part of that collapse, because he's also trying to say your organ is out of tune. They were still making organs out of tune. That's why he has the whole circle of keys, because he's like, look at A flat, it sounds like shit. It sounds horrible. And so he was exposing all that by wanting everybody to go equal temper, and they still argue about it. There's a guy on there, Bradley Lehman, I think. He's got a conspiracy theory, basically, that Bach encoded the
Bach encoded some kind of
yeah, and in the manuscript, he put these circles like a doodle.
Yeah.
To tell you how to tune your keyboard. And he tunes his keyboard, and then he does an A and B with the equal temperament. And he was on one of those comments. I can't remember which one. It was about intonation or tuning or something. But I don't want to argue with him, because I know I read his paper, and every time I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's crazy. But like, you know what I did? Like, I watched his video, and to prove my point, because I was like, man, you know what? The equal temper one sounds better to me, not the not the one he's doing. So he's advocating for this special tuning, like the way you play it and all that stuff. But he tuned these himself. So I took my snark and I put it up to the speaker. And I watched like how out of tune it was. The piano, it just doesn't. It's not in tune. Neither one, not equal tempered nor the other one. I mean, the other one was off big time, and then sometimes it was on in places, and then I put it on, and then I did the same thing for like Glenn Gould playing piano.
Yeah.
And it was beautifully sharp all the time, or whatever. It was just stayed right there. It didn't move. It was pretty funny. But I was like, hey, the snark says you're not tuned the way you say you are, dude. So whatever. But yeah, I mean, that's why we got technology now that kills all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, those guys that speak that way, they've learned that system, and they didn't go back further.
Yeah.
They probably believe that Bach composed all those chorales, the melodies. That they're based on the melody. They're not his compositions. They're 200 years old at the time that he harmonized them. That was his gig, church gig. He was just arranging the church hymn each week. And what he would do is, like, because you got like a whole bunch of texts that go in this one chorale, he would just take the text that was like, oh, this one sounds triumphant. And so he would reharmonize the whole thing with what we call imperfect cadences, because they don't match the melody up top. And it would sound major, or it would sound minor, or whatever it was. And it might have been Phrygian, or Mixolydian, or this other mode. And so what he would do, and they don't teach you this in school, is that he had a cantata where he reharmonizes the same melody for each text. And at the very end, he does the correct harmonization for what that mode is and what it was 200 years before. Meaning he did all these wrong harmonizations on purpose, and then all of a sudden at the end he gives you the traditional, original one that he learned from his predecessors, right? So he didn't really invent anything new right there. But he did do... He got away with stuff like diminished sevenths where they didn't do that before, or dissonant harmony, like clashing. And what his big thing was in the whole system, what you're learning here, is that he'll take a chorale, which is a simple mode that has no accidentals, whatever it is. Could be a major mode or Dorian, whatever. And then he uses all 12 key notes of the chromatic in the voices somewhere. So there's not any note that's missed. Like he gets all 12 in there just by doing voice leadings, right? So that's what they're trying to teach us in school, starting there, because they're simple songs, right? And they're vertical, and we're analyzing them vertically. But guess what? Bach wasn't even thinking that when he wrote them. He's thinking horizontally the whole time. Like everything is just pure melodies, and that's what they don't teach you. They don't teach us that. So these guys come now and they see someone making an argument, and they're not spelling the notes correctly. They're disobeying the circle of fifths relationships. For me, my big pet peeve is the diminished seventh. But that people they're dying on that hill that they can do whatever they want with it. And then you got these smart guys like Barry Harris. I mean, did you see that? You know who that is, right?
I heard of him.
Barry Harris was a jazz musician, And he had
Yeah,
a
they
very,
bring them up a lot. Yeah, in these types of arguments, I do see that
yeah,
name come up a lot. Yeah,
he basically is enharmonically interpreting basic stuff in his own way, and that opened a whole bunch of doors to these other ideas, which is cool. It's cool to do that because then you maybe you come up with kind of a music that you never would have come up with before. It's a different approach. In other words,
yeah.
I like to say, oh, there's a different approach. But guess what? It's enharmonic, meaning it's misspelled deliberately. So you have to start with that and say, this is not spelled correctly, but that's the point. We're going to misspell this shit on purpose, and guess what? And we're going to see where it takes us. It's like doing math, and they got to the square root of a negative number, and there's no such thing, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't exist in nature. It's like it's off of the wheel. It doesn't exist in the wheel of reality. But they said, well, let's just pretend it does. This is called I, imaginary number, and it creates this whole. A lot of people don't realize that when you do that, you're creating this geometry in an abstract place that doesn't exist, where you can solve all kinds of problems. You're solving all these interesting
That's
problems
how
in
I
this
feel.
abstract.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
but
sorry to cut you off. That's how I feel about my minor keys. So just one
right.
example. So if you take Stairway to Heaven, we're just coming back to our modern times for like just kind of ignoring the history of all this stuff. Just assuming we're starting with just 12 notes and assuming you're looking at a song such as Stairway to Heaven,
Mhm.
no one's going to say that that's in the key of C major. Everyone's going to say that that's in the key of A minor, obviously. But I mean, I know the whole thing on guitar. I've never, you know, analyzed Page's part, but from my understanding, I don't think that there's any point where he hits a G sharp note in his singing. He might, but I'm not sure. But I know that in the guitar, there's no E major chord in there. So this is a song that's in A minor, but only uses the chords from the original parent key of C major. So we don't have that perfect cadence thing. We don't have that E major to A minor cadence thing. There's no G sharp leading tone in there. There might be, but not that I'm aware of.
Well,
So
well,
to me, it
well,
seems like that's just a song that's in the Aeolian mode, or just a different perspective of C major. Like, so how is that not A minor? That's
well,
that's
well,
that's my big
well,
question.
right. Well, technically, the very second beat has the G sharp and the E, which is the leading tone and the dom.
When he's walking down chromatically, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
and
right.
and
You're
so
right. Okay.
right off the bat, it's defined with a big giant 1 5,
You're
and
right.
then back to one,
When I
but the
said it
one
wasn't containing
seven.
the G sharp, I mean there's no instance of like E A, like that big perfect
Well,
cadence. Yeah,
it's
I'm sorry.
subtle.
That a G sharp note is there in the very beginning. You're right.
It's subtle, but it's there, and
Yeah.
therefore the definition has already occurred right in the beginning statement.
Okay.
The fact that it's avoided later, it doesn't change anything really, in the bigger picture.
Okay.
But again, deliberately avoiding ever after that G sharp is what I was describing before. It's a fake mode. It's fake. It's not real. It's a pseudo mode of like you said, Aeolian, and we're doing it. We're expressing that by deliberately avoiding the G sharp. And all you have to do to rectify that is just put some big G diminished seventh in it, G sharp diminished seven, or an E7, anywhere in there, and you don't even. It could be just the note G sharp, and it gives that color.
So just the fact that the G sharp is in there somewhere, anywhere, it doesn't necessarily have to lead you right to the end. It doesn't have to lead you
Right.
back to the A minor,
Yeah.
because from my understanding, a perfect cadence was always like
Well,
placed
there's
second
nothing
to the
about
last
it, right?
chord.
But there's nothing about it that needs to be a perfect cadence. Like what I said about Bach, he used imperfect cadences when he wanted to color the melody that is set in stone that he's dealing with in a different way. And so that meant when it comes down to what's supposed to be the minor note, and he puts a four chord or whatever, that's the wrong harmony. But it's correct voice leading or whatever. It's just an imperfect cadence. And so there's nothing about the song where they got together and said, "Well, we're going to do a bunch of imperfect cadences in this piece." Like no, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't need to do that. We can see that that's what's going on, right? And so anyway, the guys will have a problem with that opening statement defining the whole piece. I mean, for me, it's good enough that I see what it is. I wouldn't call it in C major, but there are places.
Definitely not. It's yeah, that's just like theoretical on paper terms. When I say that that's in the
Yeah,
key of C major, that just means that I'm defining the key as a set of seven chords
right.
But
Yeah. So
when I'm talking to another musician, I'm not going to be like, "Hey, that's in the key of C major," because it
yeah.
definitely does not sound like
Yeah.
like a
So
major
the
thing.
language that I use to distinguish from this pseudo modal thing versus the proper minor key. If it doesn't have the dominant function, it's not a real minor key. It's not doing that. So it's a pseudo mode, which is fine. And you can call it. You can use the natural Aeolian scale Roman numerals for it. So you don't have your functional big five or your functional diminished seventh, but you have the other Roman numerals. They're still there. But again, it's like what I said. There isn't really a big seven. So if you go minor one, big seven, big six, and then you go back and you just do that over and over. Well, when you have a cyclical thing like that, we usually call that a modal vamp.
Modal vamp, yeah.
A modal vamp. And what you're doing is you're pretending, like I said before, you're pretending that it's in the key of whatever, like A minor. It's not really, because you're not using the dominant function to define the tonic. And so then you ask the question, like, well, what key signature should I use for that vamp then, A minor? Well, you would use the one that Aeolian has, which is the same one as the minor key. So it's not one or the other. It's giving you maybe the wrong impression that, oh, I can do the same then for Dorian. I should use the same key signature for
That's
Dorian and for
like
Mixolydian, for
if I
this
wanted
one,
to
for
write.
all the others.
So if I wanted to write a similar song, and I wanted to say, "Hey, I'm going to write something in D Dorian," that's the same key signature as Stairway to Heaven, same C major. I want to
Right,
write something in D Dorian,
same
and
as
then
Led Zeppelin, right?
yeah, and then right off the bat, I start out with a D minor chord, and then I throw in a C sharp note,
That's it. You're in D minor.
but then I proceed to write my music 100% in the key signature of C major,
right.
and then I get that D minor chord and that G major chord. That's what us modal people refer to as the characteristic chord that says, "Hey, that's a Dorian chord progression as opposed to just a regular minor progression." So I start out with a D minor chord, I get a C sharp note in there, and then I proceed to just stay in C, the chords from C major, and I play Santana licks and stuff like that, and it doesn't sound like your typical minor. You're saying that that's D minor,
Yeah.
that's not D Dorian.
Well, you defined it by the leading tone, by putting the C sharp in.
That
You,
so
you,
the
you
key.
automatically turn the wheel. Here's what happens in the keys. Let's say you start here and you want to go all the way around, but you still want to be C major. That's it, and you start bringing in all these other things. Well, you're turning the wheel, but these are called tonicizations. They're not called modulations yet. You could fully modulate, but that distinction of if you're just tonicizing this one chord, this one part of the music,
Yeah.
and then you go back to C major. The idea is that you go there and then you come back, you go there and you come back. You think like a fugue. It usually starts in one key, then it goes to the dominant or the subdominant key, and then it comes back, right? And yet you have to get back somehow, right? It's typically what it used to be in classical music. You don't have to there's none of these rules, right, with modern music, but the point is that you can't pretend that you're not following still the rules that are inherent in the big picture. So when you tonicize something that's way over here, whatever, you like turn the wheel, and it's brief. I think of it in terms of time. Maybe any individual can call that a modulation, however brief, right? But the point is that, oh, should I write a new key signature, right? I wouldn't do that unless I've modulated.
Okay. Yeah.
Meanwhile, all the chromatic notes are available within the framework of this one key signature, right? So I can pull in like the B flat in C major. I can use that chord because it's what I'm doing is turning the wheel, even if it's brief, and then I go back to F. But what I want is the F to be the 4 chord again. So I've turned back, and the B natural comes in, and that's your Lydian sound or whatever. But what you're really doing is you're trying to relate this family to this family, and then you keep turning it around. That's all you're doing. And if you think you're doing something else, great. But if you really want it to be D minor, you have to turn the wheel and start there, and then say, here's my C sharp. That's not in the key signature. That's your typical dominant function as it's borrowed from D major. The dominant chord of D major has the C sharp. So you're borrowing that for a second. And then I'm playing a bunch of B naturals, which are against the key signature. But at least I'm grounded in D minor. And that's just typical way the key works. But it's complicated. Like the D minor key is not easy. And it starts with understanding the Roman numerals.
Yeah.
And using them correctly, because they change. But what I'd like to do is explain why, the whole time here I'm playing devil's advocate,
Okay.
and that you're actually right, but you don't realize why, and you just need that ammunition, right? So
Okay.
I want to give you that,
I couldn't figure
or
out
you
how
can
it's not
you
accepting my
or
well, it's not accepting my credit card for some reason, so I can't upgrade. So I could just make up a new link and then we just got to go through all that again. But
all right, yeah, we'll do
yeah,
that.
it's a pain in the ass, but
Hmm?
it's it is what it is. So let me just send you another link real quick. Sorry about that, man.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. Like I got the impression you really wanted a legitimate uh, refutation or somebody that really believes,
Um,
And I wanted to argue from that position because I was kind of like one of those guys, like
yeah,
for a long time. But I had to change when I learned some more historical information. So I had to
yep,
change of heart about it. So
and that's what I'm trying to do because I've been so like advocating for this perspective, my 12 key model or whatever, like for 10
mhm.
years, whatever. And during that 10 years, people like yourself have been saying you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. So I've been racking my brain for the last at least 6 years or so,
Mhm.
trying to wrap my head around the other perspective, because I want to get it. I want to get
Mhm.
it, and I still haven't yet. Like I
Right.
understand everything you're saying. I get the historical significance and stuff like that, but I'm still not understanding why one would choose that particular, major minor
Yeah.
system over the other system. And it's not like I don't want to understand, but I'm trying to. And talking to people like you're definitely helping me out, because I'm going to go
Mhm.
back and watch this video and listen to some of the things that you were saying about, the true modes and things like that.
Right.
So yeah, but I definitely want to understand this other perspective as much as I possibly can, and then possibly maybe I'll change as well. But let me send you over that other link real quick.
So like I was saying before, over the years I did have a change of heart. So I was kind of in that camp. What I was doing though was kind of I got into reading about modal music, like Eastern and Asian music and stuff like that. There was a good book by this French guy named Danny Liu, and he goes through all these cultures. And he was very prejudiced against Western music, equal temperament, basically. He felt like things like exaggerated vibrato and singing is covering the coma and all this, like the tuning issues. And
Oh yeah, okay.
I was aware of this stuff as a kid because I was into Van Halen when I was a kid. I had this cheap guitar that looked like kind of like Van Halen, one of the early fake Van Halen looking cheap
Yeah,
guitar. But I wanted that hockey stick maple neck that it didn't have, so I put one on. And my dad, I saved up this money. It was like $150 chandler neck that I'm gonna stick on this guitar. And my dad saw what I was doing. He started laughing. I was like, it's not gonna work, dude. I was like, what do you mean? You're putting a neck on with 22 frets, and the guitar it was 21. So the intonation is going to be completely fucked. And I was
okay.
like, oh, I shouldn't cuss,
Sorry.
but you bleep it out. So I said, I don't believe you. So, and he helped me try to pull the bridge back as far as it could go, but man, it was screwed.
Yeah,
I was like in tears, man, because I was just a kid. I was like 12 or something. And I'm like tuning chords and they just sound, like everything was a mess. And I started like, I wanted to preserve the neck because of the look of it and everything. So I started learning how to play and make it sound like it's in tune, with my left hand, exaggerated, like the way I'd fret and bend and
yeah,
hold a chord differently, avoid thirds in the chord and just play power chords.
yeah.
And so, I finally got another guitar and that was it. I realized my mistake. But it allowed me to confront very directly this issue of like how the major third is sharp in the equal temperament and all that.
Okay.
And so I got used to those little micro tuned discrepancies or whatever. And then, I was listening to Indian music where they use the drone and you hear all these cool pitches. And at some point, there was a guy, I played with this guy, Greek musician from New York, bass player. And we were playing with these Turkish musicians. And we were everything is Western style, like chords, guitars, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And the bass player went up to the mic and he's playing with us and he starts singing. And he's hitting these notes with his voice that are not in the scale, but they're beautiful. Like he's nailing them, like very precisely. And you can't go like because like it's a very and it's just like he would hit these notes very deliberately. They were in between notes, but very precise, like razor sharp. Throw a dart on the bullseye. And I was so impressed by that sound, and I was very aware of it. It was like, wow, man, like I understand the discrepancy. I know what he's doing. I just could never do something like that myself.
How were you able to tell that he was hitting these in between notes though? How could you?
It affects you. We're a very loud band. It's very loud.
Okay.
Everything is tonal, equal tempered stuff, and the guy singing and everything. But then this bass player walks up, and relative to what we were playing, which were chords, basically like normal progressing chords, whatever, he sings these notes that are just not in the scale. I mean, not in the tuning. They're like in between notes. They're micro.
Not one of the 12 notes. That's weird.
Well, no, because these Eastern systems have this whole system designed where, now you can do this with a voice and Western. This is a hybrid concept, really. You're using a piano or a guitar. You can't really do this. Like you can bend, and you have the pitch bending thing on the keyboard, and people are doing that, right? Or they program it in, and you hear like, it's like that weird note comes in,
Yeah.
But just in the moment that the guy did, I was like, wow, he can just do that like as he wants. That's a different system. That's what real modal music is. It's a training first in the tuning system itself, the tuning. It's all based on a fundamental, and then you have to know relative to that fundamental which of the frequencies you're using that are, so what we think of as a major third is a little flat. Now, people already know that when they sing flat of the major third, and then you play a chord and it doesn't match. Or you're playing guitar and like you deliberately turn the third string down or whatever it is to make your chord sound good, and then you go and play another chord, it sounds horrible. So that's what I mean by robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Okay.
You can't do that in the equal tempered system. Something's got to give.
Okay.
So what gives in the Eastern music tradition is that you don't get to change keys, and you got to be careful which chords you play because some of them are really bad. So if you're going to do chords, so they're not really even using chords in this system. It's just melody based on a fundamental drone, and then the music like Arabic music that doesn't use drones, you can hear the drone or the fundamental in the instrument itself, like a drum. Like boom, boom, boom. It's a pitch, right? Or the way the wind instruments are built you can't alter them. Like you can blow harder on Western horns and change the pitch. But once these instruments are constructed with these micro-tuned intervals in there, that's it. You can only play in one key, and you need another flute for the other key or whatever if you want to use different keys.
Okay.
And I lived with these Turkish guys too for a while after college, and they had a saz, which looks like a guitar or a bouzouki, kind of thing. But it has extra fret that it's out of, like I couldn't play guitar with this guy because every time you play that note, it just sounds like, relative to the guitar. So I was reading about this modal stuff, and I realized, okay, when we're playing around with modes in Western music, it's fake. It's not real because we have the whole tuning system and the whole baggage coming with it. So I separate the two concepts. There's tonal music, and it is what it is. It's the circle fifths. That's what it is. And then there's modal music, which is based on the tuning first. And then you have to have a traditional method of melody, and you get a guru to teach you what is the tradition, so you're not making shit up like those hippies that hang out with Ravi Shankar. I'm playing a raga. They have to learn the system, and Ravi Shankar was famous because of the Beatles, and all these hippies were going there to do the spiritual investigations, and the music was part of it. But anyway, so for a long time I have that, and then my professional job is playing flamenco, which is Spanish music from.
Yeah, I love flamenco. Yeah, would love to learn how to play some of that stuff.
Yeah, so you can buy my book if you want. You read music, right? Because
no, I'm not a sight reader. I can read. I can't read super fast, so I'd have to probably take my time to go through it and stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, they forced me to do this in standard notation because this is for classical guitar and flamenco guitar. So this
Okay.
is Melbay.
Okay.
Anyway, anybody can find this now. It's $25 cheap.
Okay.
But I teach flamenco in there. So it's part of my co-author is really cool. He inherited the job from Juan Serrano, who was a famous flamenco guitarist. And so the program that he inherited was a unique one, I think, in this country, or maybe in the world. I don't know. Well, no, probably in Europe they have this, where you get a degree in classical guitar, but you also learn flamenco guitar. And that's unique to that guy because he could also read music. So he created a legitimate curriculum where the kids could go get their degree. And I went out there and did a workshop, and I was impressed to the kids because they could do both, really. And it's weird to see that because there's a big division between classical music and what we do in Andalusia, flamenco. No music, everything's oral tradition, or
Okay.
you learn by, sight.
Actually went to take, I sought out flamenco guitar lessons about 10 years ago. I went and found this guy, but he didn't teach me any flamenco. He's like, nah, you got to learn classical guitar first. I'm like, but I want to learn flamenco. He's like, nah, you got to learn classical. And so I was taking these classical guitar lessons. I was like, I really just wanted to learn the flamenco. So I stopped going, So, but that was weird, but I guess that's
Yeah, it's very much like hardcore jazz. Like you don't use music. You got to sit in with the musicians and learn by standards and making mistakes, learn how to do the system and the discipline they're doing, which is very different than the Western tradition, even though it is related, And I recognize the same thing with the flamenco guitars. It's something about it's very Western. Like I can feel it. Like when I played Bach stuff and the Bach beret and all that I learned as a kid, I was like, this is very much like a Bach kind of sound, but then they have the singing, which sounds like Middle Eastern, and the story is the origins of flamenco are completely mysterious. Nobody knows what it is, but what they do is they say that, well, Spain was a big melting pot of culture, so they had the gypsies or like Indian Punjab area heritage, and whatever they brought with them, they mixed with the Arabs that were once there before Columbus, and the kings kicked them out and colonized the world. And then once they colonize the world, they bring indigenous stuff back, and so it's a big mix of stuff. And so it's vague. And then reading about the modal systems around the world, I was like, oh, maybe, it seems like our flamenco music is a hybrid of the two ideas. So you've got this kind of modal singing maybe, and along for the ride is going to be like this weird Phrygian thing
so
we do.
it sounds very Phrygianish.
Right. And then you got the guitar, which obviously you can't do that. Like it's the same thing like this Turkish guys. I couldn't play guitar with that guy because he's got the wrong note in there. Like, it doesn't work. So it's a hybrid is what I looked at. And I realized like there's a lot of popular music now. You go to the disco club and they're doing Arabic music, but it's total westernized, right? It's like there's chords everywhere and little modal vamps going on, and they're singing Arabic sounding stuff, but it's not real Arabic like the traditional thing with the guru teaching you the correct pitches and all that. It's not that. It's a hybrid. Corruption, if you want. It's corrupted. So I figured that's what our flamenco was, that it's got that kind of corrupted hybrid going on. But over the years, and arguing with people about music theory, about that music in particular, I started to realize that something else was going on with the music. And that's when I started to read about history and stuff, and I had a big change in my thinking because I realized the reason that you are right all along about this, well, it's not really the major, it's not the minor, it's something else. It's this, which I realize is related to flamenco as well, guitar in Andalusia. Why do we have the blues, which is an ambiguous mix of Dorian and Mixolydian and whatever else.
Yeah, a little major minor
On a tonal
stuff.
on basically what seems to be a tonal progression 1-4-5. But there's this other stuff that we're doing. It's like, we do whatever we want, we feel it.
Yeah.
Right?
I call
And
that
then same thing for like flamenco music. It's like, we're doing Phrygian. It's not the minor. It's not the dominant of the minor. It's not. But there are people that have that, what we're talking about. No, it has to be. Because those modes collapsed. They're dead. They're gone. It became the dominant function of the minor. And you can no longer talk about Phrygian. The only time they talk about Phrygian is with the caveat in the Western music. They call it the Phrygian half cadence because it occurs in the minor key and it didn't yet resolve to the 1, and you don't analyze it as like a Phrygian key. You analyze it as, well, this is the 5 chord. It did not yet resolve to the 1, regardless if it goes somewhere else after, it's arbitrary. We call it Phrygian half cadence because there once was a time when there was a Phrygian cadence, and it was its own mode. It was part of the ecclesiastical mode system. And they didn't call it Phrygian most of the time back then. They called it mode 3 and 4, because number 1 and 2 was Dorian and Hypodorian, and then mode 3 and 4 were Phrygian and Hypophrygian, basically. And because of the ambiguity, like I talked about, they collapsed down into one mode or one key called minor key, the Phrygian being the dominant function of the minor, right?
Okay.
And we learn this in flamenco tradition without having to talk about it as, no, this is not the dominant of the minor. This is its own key. It's its own thing. And so I had to do this for many years where I had this vision of my circle, because I know that, look, I'm playing a Western instrument. It's all collapsed. It's a circle. Like, it's major or it's minor. That's it. I couldn't deal with it any other way than to add one more tier to the circle inside, and I use it as a translating tool for my flamenco business because they have their own discipline and terminology. But I feel
like
I need it because I'm playing guitar. It's got to fit in the wheel somehow. So what I have now in my mind, or did for a while, was, okay, I've got major, C major, I got A minor, and I have what they call the dominant function. Is its own key called E Phrygian, and it has all of the contrivances of the minor key, except that they're all centered toward the gravity of the Phrygian, or E, if you call it the E mode. And we actually use tonal function in the same way that you would in the minor key, except we don't have that tonic. We have this other one.
You chuck a B7 in front of that E.
Yeah, but it's not a B7 because I need the F. So it's a B7 flat 5.
Oh, okay.
That is the dominant function that comes from the Phrygian mode. And I realized they usually don't talk about that. They have other language. They don't talk about Phrygian. They only have Phrygian half cadence, half. But what I realized that this Phrygian cadence is legit. And it used to be avoided because of voice leading rules. The tritone and whatnot was being avoided, or it was staggered so that you could get there. But for the most part, that's part of the reason why the mode collapsed into dominant function, because of those tensions that were not convincing enough. But I'm like, here I am doing these convincing moves. We usually use F7, sharp 11 to go to E, right? Which is actually the tritone sub for the B7 flat 5. Okay. So the B7 flat 5, and they use superlocrian on it in jazz, or the tritone sub of that, which we use the Lydian dominant. It's the same scale, same notes. It's basically C melodic minor. In the classical music, and I saw one guy arguing about it, the D sharp is the leading tone. It is functional. And they sometimes argue even that it's not functional. And I'm like, it has to be. I'm learning that it is by my system of oral tradition. I mean, they're not using musical terms like this, but I recognize what it is. In classical music, the reason it's a Phrygian half cadence because it's dominant, and then they have this situation where they have this F7, but they spell it with a G sharp instead of an E flat. That's called an augmented sixth. So above the F is not an E flat, it's a sixth, D. And it used to be the Phrygian half cadence, which was D minor over F to E. But what they do is they raise that D to D sharp, and it becomes a functional leading tone. There's only one historian, like on the wiki page, who's got it right, and it's Tchaikovsky. And he goes, I don't understand why they're calling this thing, whatever they're calling it, non-functional, whatever. He says, the D sharp is the leading tone to the dominant. So you're basically tonicizing the dominant, or you're in the key of the dominant. You're using this chord to function. And that's exactly how the jazz guys use it as a tritone sub.
You're in the key of E Phrygian, right?
Exactly. Which doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So it's not supposed to exist. So that's why in my mind I had to account for this reality by putting it in the circle and saying, well, everybody's using it. They're using it in jazz. We're using it in flamenco, and the jazz and the flamenco guys have been speaking each other's language since Miles Davis and before. Like Miles Davis recognized it, and he put it together. And now all the jazz fusion guys got into like, oh, I want to play with Paco de Lucia because he knows this thing intuitively. And they don't use the same language, but the same musical function, right? This is not Middle Eastern modal stuff, not the way I read about it. No, because you're using functional harmony. So for a long time, I've had this in my head, like, okay, everything is fine. I still agree with those guys, major, minor, but we also have Phrygian. Ooh, that's a hard sell. That's a very hard sell, right? I can't sell it to anybody. Not that has that training, because they're viewing the Phrygian as the dominant function and only that.
Yeah.
But here I am using it in flamenco, and they use it in jazz. Yeah. And so what's going on here? Well, I finally realized, almost accidentally, that the modal system that I keep talking about that collapsed down, it didn't collapse. It still exists, and we're still using it. And so when you see someone like, I saw this video, Adam Neely, and he's talking about he can't properly explain Hey Joe, because it's not in the major, it's not in the minor, it's a mix, it's a vague mixture of the two things. And I'm like, I started seeing this stuff in the Renaissance music, and I was like, oh, it's a relic of the Renaissance. They had these systems with the ground, like the Romanesca, and these things where you go through these chords and you cycle back around. And they were in a mode. They weren't in a key. They're in one of these modes, and then they just go in a circle. They cycle through, and then you deliver your poetry over that. So Hey Joe goes C, G, D, A, and you end on E major. And so I realized in that old system, that's mode 1, Dorian, is E Dorian. And the chord voicings that come out, like the A with a C sharp, was part of the system. That's a musica ficta. It's called like a C sharp. It's used by the voice to put that little cadence in there, and it's called a plagal. They're plagal cadences, C to G, D to A, they're plagal. And the final resolution to the Dorian tonic, which is the E minor, has the Picardy third, which is this G sharp. It was absolutely required for that final chord because of the voices in the church that just they vibrate wrong. So these relics are coexisting with all along through the whole classical common era, and they still exist now. We're still using them. Like that Seal song, just the three climbing up. That is a typical cadence that you see in the Renaissance.
Okay.
And the Phrygian mode did the same thing. It would have been D minor instead of D major. It was that D minor goes to E major, like C, D minor, E, and you resolve the mode. And you do that and the melody comes down the scale, A, G, F, E. They call it Andalusian cadence. I realized when I saw this.
That was my last YouTube video. It's about an Andalusian cadence, actually.
I started seeing the Andalusian cadence in this Vihuela book, like the Spanish tablature. I'm like, that's exactly what I'm doing. That's what I've been learning my whole career, is this stuff. It's voice leading. And we even preserve in the flamenco guitar the correct, meaning the politically correct ones from the time. But we also violate those with the parallel fifths all over the place. Power chords coming in flamenco guitar all the time.
Yeah.
And chromatic moves and stuff like that. But what's the point of it all is that big cadence. And we do it, so we have three keys. We have the major, the minor, and we have the Phrygian. But we also have some of that Mixolydian, like the blues.
That's what I was going to say. What about, can't you do the same thing for Mixolydian? Can't you say, hey, this is not the 5
so the blues,
now, you know?
The blues, I mean, I recognize them out. Dun 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 dun. That little thing, I've even seen that as a main melody in the Renaissance. It is there. Okay. And it was very clearly in the G mode, what we call Mixolydian, or mode 7.
Okay.
And the harmony for it was all, a G major chord. But there was an F natural. And sometimes there's the F sharp, which is the D7. And sometimes there's a B flat, which you would think would be the wrong mode. But that was the 4 chord is right there. And then they would even sometimes cadence in the middle to the Phrygian, or the 3rd mode, as like in the lyrics, you would come in the middle of a piece and then you would go on and finalize it. And what you would do is, to get to the Phrygian mode, that whole augmented thing I was talking about, that would be an A sharp that resolves to the, C.
Okay.
and I mean to the B major, right? So the A sharp to B is the typical way you do the blues ending. You go A
Okay.
sharp, B, G. They call it B flat and B
Okay.
natural, but it's really back. It was a leading tone to the Phrygian, meaning to the B. But
Okay.
you go back to G, and I realized the blues is doing the same thing. It's all it's been doing all along, and I guess Miles Davis figured that out. That's why he has that kind of blues album where it's like he uses the Phrygian cadence at the turnaround instead of the
Okay.
normal, thing. But anyway, I recognize that there's a coexistence of the old modal system and the tonal system together. They coexist, and the tuning is arbitrary. Doesn't matter because they weren't really doing pure modal music back then. It was this vague, ambiguous thing. Was that really Dorian? Well, what was mattered was it's end in G, and you can have a B flat, you can have an A sharp, and you can have an F sharp. But mainly you have F natural, and that was the whole thing about the bluesy sound and all that. So that was going on, and it's still going on. And when I realized all of this, I was like, okay, so now when you want to analyze this modal stuff, you don't really need the major minor collapse because they can coexist. And so in that framework, you should be talking about Hey Joe or the blues or a lot of these like silly pop songs that they was like, look at this song that defies music theory logic. It's Sweet Home Alabama, whatever.
Oh yeah.
These
Biggest
things
argument.
were,
Is it D Mixolydian or is it G major?
yeah,
You know?
yeah, these things were normal
Yeah.
type of troubadour modal songs from the Renaissance that are surviving. They survive. They're relics, and some you can trace literally back to that time. And so realizing that, I'm like, okay, what's really going on is this. When you read about Renaissance music and they talk about the motets and all that stuff, and like the language that they use, it is not the language that you use with the common practice era language. That's where the dividing line lives.
Okay.
And this clash is not happening. Like nobody's like these guys say like those aren't chords. You can't call them chords. They're moving voices. Tonal function doesn't happen until later. I was like, really? There's no tonal function in the Renaissance. Really? That's what they want to. I mean, this book is full of chords, but they didn't call them chords. They didn't
Okay.
have that concept yet.
Gotcha.
They're just leading tone voicings and things like that, and you have to avoid this, that, and the other for aesthetic reasons. And as soon as those reasons start collapsing, and it was not like they weren't already breaking rules. They talk about the stable boys are strumming the guitar, which is like a ukulele back then, and that's just it's like so low class or whatever. And we're gonna do the correct voicings as the voices would be done in church by the priest that trains you. But the reality is that, and then they keep that language like in this space, and then you will not use that language or this language over here to describe this music. So in modern music, I look at it now as like, well, we should really be using this other language to describe it because that's what's going on. That it's perfectly fine to fit into this other system. And so that guy that said, "Oh, they said you can't play C sharp in Dorian," so I found Josquin de Puy with a C sharp in his Dorian piece. And I'm like, dude, that's 1520. That's of course he had it in Dorian. Then it's not the same Dorian they're talking about. They're talking about the fake Dorian or whatever.
That's interesting. That's really
Yeah.
really interesting. Like, I mean, because I thought I had a pretty good understanding of the modes, but my understanding is limited to this equal temperament modern day system. I was not aware that modes had this whole other,
Hmm.
historical story
Yeah.
to them. So I'm definitely
And
gonna have to look
well,
into that some more.
unfortunately, you have also within that world that they will not accept either what I'm saying now because they dress up with the outfit and they get a lute and thou shalt not play chords. They shall do the correct whatever.
Yeah.
And it's called historically informed performance practice. And they stick with that and they use that language to describe the music.
Okay.
And you can't mix that language. As soon as you do, you're corrupting the concept or whatever. So
Gotcha.
you have the gatekeepers of that Renaissance music that would never accept what I'm saying. Like, hey, Joe, we can analyze from the
Yes, I've
vantage
noticed
point
that
of
people get
Renaissance.
very mad. This is a very heated topic too.
Right, right,
It's always
right.
better to talk to someone in person, because when you talk to people online, it seems like everyone's so mad and everything like that. But this
Yeah.
is a very heated topic. I'm like,
Yeah.
why are you so mad about this?
Well, there are people that are finding great examples that are these ones that
Yeah,
defy the explanation and then putting it in your face so that you can have that debate. And that's the problem, is that the language you're using isn't the right language for that.
gotcha.
So looking back now at the Renaissance and the modal system that we have and using the key signature, yeah, the whole point of the Mixolydian mode was that it's the same as the C major, but you're defining it by all these other properties. And you're allowed to use accidentals in there.
Okay.
And that's the thing that's missing from the story. Pre-modal collapse is still going on. It's
Yeah.
still happening. We're still using that system, and we just don't realize it. Because it's learned intuitively and through traditional music and things like that. You don't know where it came from, and who cares? It's just how we do music now. It's
Yeah.
living and breathing.
Yeah. That's the
So,
thing. Things have changed over time. Tunings have changed over time. Styles of music have changed over time. In our modern day, a lot of stuff is limited to like these 3 or 4 chord progressions,
yeah.
which seems like this other, I don't know, simplified model. I don't know. It seems like that, but that's why it seems like this simplified modal model might be a good way to describe some of today's modern music.
Yeah. I mean,
Like, hey, you're
it
playing four
works.
chords. You're playing A minor, then you're playing an F major, then you're playing like a C major chord, and you're playing a G major chord. But everything's A minor. You're making it sound sad. It's a simple little
Yeah.
4 chord progression. Just call it.
Yeah. For me, it's like it's a
Very simple
coin,
stuff.
and on one side, you've got your 2 and your 5, and on the other side, you have the modal vamp,
Yeah.
Mixolydian and Dorian, and you're doing both. It's one thing. You're doing both. And if you choose to describe it one way or the other, it doesn't matter, really. It is what it is. But realizing that there was a historical situation that's kind of like that language that doesn't
Yep.
communicate with itself, I realized, like, this is what's going on. These guys that are dying on the hill of major and minor have started from the beginning. They didn't get the whole historical collapse part.
I got
They're
you.
not carrying that baggage with them. They're starting here and moving forward and saying, whatever is going on here is messed up. Yeah, because it's surviving from the older system.
Yeah.
And now you're trying to describe it and you can't. That's why the augmented 6 chord, they don't call it a Phrygian cadence. It is. It's Phrygian.
Okay.
In jazz, they don't call the superlocrian and Lydian dominant tritone sub as Phrygian cadence. That's what it is. It's coming from that old system. And, they're just using an enharmonic explanation for it. And really what they're doing in jazz is they stop even, like, they only use musica vera. They don't even realize they're doing this. They're only using the naturals as the key signature. And then they apply ficta everywhere is what they're doing, which are fake notes. And they don't care about the spelling of them, like the enharmonic spelling of. That's why they can do one diminished chord everywhere and modulate to every key they want, because they don't care. They don't care about the circle of fifths or the collapse of the modes. They don't care. They're ignoring all of that and just saying, well, dude, it's 1 through 7. That's it. Flat to 7, double flat to 7, whatever you want, and there you are. And they want you to learn that as part of the system. Why? So that when you get a chart and then chords are flying by and you're keeping rhythm, that you don't have time to think. You just say, okay, Lydian dominant, super locking,
That's
2
pretty
5
much
1.
how my brain has been working for
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
But I don't have that whole historical, story to follow along with that. I feel
Yeah.
like that plays a big part in a lot of these arguments. A lot of the times I find myself in
Oh,
arguments bringing stuff up from like centuries ago. I'm like, but why are we talking about? But what you're saying
yeah,
makes sense. A lot of stuff has happened, which has led to these different systems and thought processes
yeah.
and whatnot. So
Yeah,
very
in
interesting
the
stuff.
end, you have to have the lingo, the language, the lexicon that everybody else is using. It's like my guitar hero is John McLaughlin. You know who that is?
Yeah.
He's like jazz fusion, Mahavishnu. Right? Unlike some of my other guitar heroes, he's obviously a very informed, studied musician. He's played with Miles Davis and all this stuff, but he knows very deep music theory stuff. And so he came out with a box set instructional video. And I love it. It's great. But he's teaching the jazz perspective. And so he comes to the this was hilarious for me because like after my whole circle of fifth business and my defense of the minor major, right? He's like, I'm now going to show you the harmonic minor, which I got to play with Paco de Lucia and all this stuff, the Flamenco guys, which means he's playing the Phrygian dominant is what he really means. He says, here's the harmonic minor scale, and the notes flash up because he's got a Godin that's transcribing it. A, B, C, D, E, F, A flat.
Yeah.
Yeah, A flat.
Okay.
And the whole transcription is that. And it's like the A flat everywhere and the rest naturals.
Huh.
And I'm like, this guy doesn't even care. He doesn't care. There's no G in this song. There's no G sharp, there's no G. It's nothing about that. It's A flat and A and the rest naturals.
Huh.
Right? And I was like, that's what I mean when I say a lot of people are lackadaisical about the note spelling. It's almost by design. The enharmonic thing is what it is. Who cares what it is? You do it, and then it works. That's it. So you don't think about it. For me, the spelling comes from the circle and the deeper connection, and ultimately what we've been talking about, the history of the whole thing comes together, and then you understand.
I take the spelling very seriously, too. I would be like, it's got to be a G sharp, you know. Like,
yeah. So the way I look at it is like these guys are master level. They deliberately don't care about the spelling because they're using a different system. There's a different thought process behind it. You know, they don't want you to care about the bigger picture. In fact, they don't want you to even think of the big picture. They want you to isolate one chord. Here it is. It's a 13th scale. It's a mode. Here's the next chord. It's a different mode. Here's the next one. It's another mode.
And then once you understand how my brain works, yep, exactly.
Yeah, once you understand each of these isolated modal islands, then you can apply substitutions for those.
Mm-hmm.
Like, instead of mixed Lydian, I'm going to do super Locrian. Okay. Instead of Lydian, I'm going to do Lydian dominant, and then Phrygian. Instead of Phrygian, I'm just going to go back to Lydian. You know, like it, and that's what 2-5-1. Boom. You know, or what was the Aeolian flat 5? You use that one on the minor 7 flat 5 chord, and then this one. You know, and once you realize it's so systematic, I'm like, oh man, if they spell the stuff correctly, then they would see what they're doing is the Phrygian cadence, and it goes back to the Renaissance. Like that's it. It's like for me, it's clear, straight line at what they're doing. They've re-pulled it up out of the ground, but they're not using that language anymore. It's disguised by the enharmonic misspellings everywhere. You know. So anyway, that's what I see is going on. So.
Very interesting stuff, man. Very interesting stuff. Was not aware of the historical significance of all this stuff, man. It's very cool. I'm definitely gonna have to look into the what would you suggest if I were to go and kind of just like dive into this, what we talked about today, like historical modes or the history of modes, like what specific certain terms would you
There's a channel right now that's really, really great. It's called Early Music Sources.
Early Music Sources? Okay. Yeah, I'll check it out.
And it's disorienting at first because if you had learned like the major minor key system and the terminology they use, you're not getting any of that. You're getting the old Renaissance and medieval and Renaissance terminology for notes, scales, solmization, all this stuff. It's very disorienting.
Okay.
But if you follow through with them at certain moments, they'll point out, like the one video is really great on cadences because he shows you how cadences work, and you very quickly realize where tonal harmony comes from. It comes from these vertical, and then he points out one of the modal resolutions, a Phrygian mode, is called the soft cadence, like B flat to A. Normally, you would think in that mode A, that's your tonic, that you need a B flat, you have to go G minor, A. That's the Phrygian cadence. What it does is go G minor, D major, and you're like, what is that? That's the plagal. And it only happened because of the bass move. And he goes, now, you realize that the main melody went to A, but we have the wrong tonality. We're in D now. How did we get there? And he goes, this is where you see the clash of thinking between these Renaissance ideas and the later tonal music harmony. And it's a very simple statement, but it's very huge in the bigger picture of why people can't communicate about this stuff very
What
easily.
video is that you said that's on that channel?
That's on that channel. Yeah, it's
right
called,
there. That's the conflict I'm always talking about. Maybe I just haven't been able to clearly define this conflict, but what you're saying sounds a lot like what I'm constantly
Yeah,
coming.
yeah. You have to understand that melody gave birth to all this mess, and how that melody was viewed, and what were the rules at the time. And he's got like a big X on the note they're not supposed to do. Like, but we do those notes now. Like, we don't have the big X anymore. We can do whatever we want. But back then they had rules that kind of, you follow those rules and you end up in a certain place. You don't have a choice, right?
Yeah.
And so, anyway, that one was about cadences. That's
Okay.
where the, cadences back then were the punctuation of the text is what it
Yeah.
is. The melody would do this, the harmonies would do that, and then you have a cadence. Eventually, you come up with the way the bass works. You have a perfect, authentic cadence, imperfect, whatever, and that language changes once you start dealing with the tonal function. But that wasn't what was going on back then. They were using modes and not pure modes. But
Different.
they were messy, dirty modes.
Okay. All
Right?
right. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I got to look up, man. I learned a lot, man. This is really cool stuff. I got a couple more of these lined up too. Some other people
Mhm.
won't be doing these. I'm going to do like a little series about it, and
Okay, cool.
let you guys do most of the talking. Because I just want to hear your perspective because I'm trying to learn that perspective the best I can, man. So I really
Mhm.
appreciate you doing this with me, man. And
Sure.
if you want to kind of promote your book again or anything else, do that.
Yeah,
Put that
yeah. I
on
have
the
this.
channel. I'm not sure how
Yeah, I
many
have
people
this
are going to
book.
watch this video.
Yeah, this is
Formative
called
works. Okay.
Formative Works for a Classical Flamenco Classical Guitar Tradition.
Cool.
And this one is the one I recommend for the student or beginners of flamenco, but it's part of a series. There's going to be 4 books total. One of them's going to be very advanced. The earlier one was very rudimentary, maybe very very easy stuff, and then we have one in the middle that's more advanced. But really, this is the one I'm promoting to a lot of students that want to learn about flamenco guitar playing because it's about the song forms that they have and the technique, and it is in standard notation. So the first half of the book is like classical, basic, rudimentary note reading, open position. Normally in flamenco guitar, we don't use notation, we use tablature, just like from the Renaissance, basically.
Okay.
In fact, that's how I started noticing things. Like, look at this tablature, it looks so familiar. But yeah, this is all standard notation, which is a little unusual, but it's getting people on board with both classical pedagogy, like learning how to read open position, beginner,
Okay.
and then, the flamenco portion is way more advanced in terms of being able to read. But what I'm showing you to play are these little small modules that you need to master to graduate. So I see there's a lot of flamenco guitar methods that are extremely watered down that I don't like because there's a thing about the flamenco guitar that's a big concern, so the authenticity of the sound and all that. So there is a way to achieve it. It's all technical, mostly right hand stuff.
Yeah.
So once the left hand, you figure out what voicings you need to do. It's all about learning the right hand techniques and all that. So I'm trying
So
to.
I tried it so hard, man.
It's not easy. So I'm trying to show authentic stuff in here. So it is very challenging. So it's
Okay.
not really beginners. But the idea was to get from the earlier book that Juan Serrano did, which was very rudimentary, to something a little more hardcore, authentic. That this is what this is showing, and that bridges into another book. And we have another one coming out. It's in that's going to be advanced music or whatever. So
Cool. Yeah, man. Maybe I'll pick up a copy myself, man. I would always
yeah,
like to learn a little bit about flamenco, man.
yeah, you can get it on Amazon. It's like $25. It's cheap.
Okay. So people can find it on Amazon, or can they look you up by your name or whatever? But
Yeah, yeah,
you would
yeah. Look up that specific title, "Formative Works for the Flamenco Classical Guitar Tradition." And
cool.
there's another book, it's like the red one. I recommend the blue one because that gets the beginner level stuff that you need. So,
All right, man.
yeah,
I appreciate you taking the time to do this with me, man. Like I
sure,
said, it's always better to talk to people in person, man, because it
yeah.
seems like everyone's mad at each other online, when they're typing and stuff. But then when you
Well, I
meet someone
mean, you
in
type with one finger. I mean, my finger hurts just from like.
person, then you talk to someone in person, you're like, hey, they're all right. So
Right.
I should do this more, and I'm going to do this more. So
Okay, cool.
thank you very much, man. Have a good one.
All right, we'll see.
Take it easy.